Hello, everybody. I'm excited to be here. My name is Saar Rachamim. I'm an automation tech lead at a company named Get. Get's product is a mobile application that connects between a taxi driver and a rider. It is in the same marketplace as Uber and Lyft. It is a great company with great people. The product is amazing. As part of my daily work as an automation tech lead, what I used to do is actually to lead on the tech aspect automation developers. This is actually can help in having best practice combined between all the automation development. Nowadays, I mainly focus on data teams, on pushing processes as part of the R&D. And what I actually love and my passion is to develop automation tools and to try to think out of the box, and this way to innovate in the company. As any other guy, I'm also taking a taxi rides. And when I used to do it, when I just started to take a taxi ride, I would talk to the taxi driver about politics, about his family, his troubles. And after I started to work at Get, and I started to say to the drivers that I'm part of the Get company, suddenly the conversation were totally different. It seems like instead of complaining about politics, they started to share their best experience in the application. If they had a good day, instead of telling about the soccer team that won, they start to share the good experience with the application. So I won't forget this specific taxi ride where the driver started to tell me about a bug in the application. The application all the time was crashing to him. Every few minutes, it was crashing. He told me that he tried to go to the company itself to sit with all the developers and to see how to fix it. He even tried to replace his mobile device, but still it was crashing no matter what. So from my side, when I'm actually sitting with a customer, and I'm sure that it's not relevant what you do if you come from finance, mobility, or any other aspect, when you sit with your customer, and your customer is telling you about something that influences them, in this case, it was influencing his income. So I felt really bad about it. And afterward, I started to think, how can we actually try and solve it? How can we try and find something that is in the client side? In this specific case, the bug was something that it was part of the mobile application in our customer side. So I really started to think about a solution. And let's dive in first about what is a stability problem, app stability problem. If you think about app stability problem, it can be caused in a case where actually there is your application, and on the same platform, you have a lot of processes that are created, and they consume the memory. And there are a lot of processes, and they also increase the CPU. It can lead to a situation where the operating system can crash. It can lead to a bad interaction between the user and your application. And if you kind of try to think about it, it can be even be analyzed as something that is similar to a virus. Did anyone here had a virus in the past in his computer? Well, I know I did. I had a few of them. And one of the viruses was actually created a lot of processes that was using all the resources in my computer, and it led to a situation where everything was very slow, and even the computer started to restart from time to time. This specific symptoms is the same symptom as if you have performance issues in your application. So, in this case, if, for example, I started to think about it, this is something that is very influential and can be very bad for your application. So, if, for example, I'm starting to think about an application that I'm using, let's say something like Shakespeare quotes of the day, and this application, if I'm using it, I'm expected to see something like Romeo and Juliet or something like this. And we have here an application which is actually have some problem in the server. And instead of seeing one of these quotes, we see an SSL error has occurred, and a secure connection to the server cannot be made. And the comment below it is that Shakespeare was ahead of his time. So yes, it's not exactly crash of the application, but let's think that if we had something similar, how it will influence it for us. If our company gets kind of feedbacks from social networks, I know it's publicity, but I'm not sure that every publicity is a good publicity. So what kind of solution can we do? In this case, we have a lot of crashes of the app. How can we solve it? How can we improve it? So when I started to think about it, I was in a crossroad. I said to myself, maybe it's something that the manual testing can improve, but coming to think about it, in our application, there is a driver that gets rides again and again and again during an 8-hour shift. I think it can be tedious, nearly impossible, even though nothing is impossible, for a manual tester for 8 hours of its day, just to get ride over and over and over again. So for me, it was clear that automation is the solution. And even in this case, when I'm thinking about automation, we all know that there are a lot of tools outside for everything. Everything we can think about it, someone already thought about it before us. So I need to think whether to go for a third-party solution or to develop something in-house. In third-party solution, it means to Google and find something over the web that actually can give us what we need. And we have a pros and cons in each direction, because if we think about the pros from a third-party solution, it's something that we got support for the tool we need. We don't need to spend time in developing something on our own. We just get it and use it. And beside of it, it's something that if there is something wrong in the tool, we just go to our manager and say, look, it's their fault, it's not me, I didn't do it. And there are a lot of cons too, because if you go to a third-party solution, most of the solutions that are worth to work with are solutions that you will pay a lot of money for it. And if, for example, they support only Windows and you are working with Linux, you won't get the solution you need, not unless you pay for it. And for some of the parts, it can be very expensive. Other than that, adjusting the thing specifically to your needs won't be done if you go to a third-party solution. On an in-house solution, I think that the most obvious pro about it is that it's something that can lead to your self-development. It means, for example, if you are developing in Java and you want to learn something about web development, about web application, this is something that maybe you can use to enhance your knowledge. You could try to use these problems, let's say, and make it to kind of something that you need to work hard to get it, and you just grow from it. Another con, obviously, is that you take the responsibility for what you build. It means that if, for example, now something is not working, you'll need to put the extra time for it. And I guess it goes hand in hand. And let's say that in our side, what I prefer to do is to go to an in-house solution, because I think that it was very difficult in our side, for example, to use the third party. We did have a third party solution, but this solution was very difficult to use, nearly impossible, because of the reason that we needed a special access to the device. We needed a lot of stuff, and we couldn't use it in our place. So we decided to develop it in our own. And even though after we selected to go and develop our own tool, we had a lot of questions in mind. Some of the question was, what language do we want to choose? If you go with Java, so you are going with a programming language, which is free to use. If you are going with C#, on the other end, you need to pay for licenses and other stuff, like integration tools and so on. So it's also something you need to consider. Other than that, what is the platform that you can use? I mean, some of us might choose to go and develop a mobile application that will serve our needs. Will we want to go and develop a web automation tool? And there are a lot of stuff that we need to consider. I'll just say that in our side, we decided to go with Java language because this is already the language that we use in order to develop the tools. So the gap wasn't that big. Other than that, the decision was to go over a web application, since when you go over web, it's actually making it accessible to all the team in the organization. Another thing you need to consider is whether you are using a database. Will you go for a SQL or NoSQL, which means big data? Do you actually need it or not? This is part of the thing you need to think about. And now I'm going to show you a little bit about the tool itself, and just the description as it in our workplace. What we do, we actually use a computer which executes all the tests in a mobile device. It goes and make a ride, which is accepted by the driver. It makes the payment. It makes everything like the driver does. And it's kind of run the test, which can be considered as a longevity test. They are executed for 8 hours and can be adjusted to the shift you want for the driver. And at the same time, the code is on another thread, executing part of it that takes all the CPU and the memory from the device itself. And this code can be done on every mobile device which is on Android. We're using the ADB and actually taking all the information, all the data from the device, specifically related to the application that we are testing. Okay, we can see that all the data that we are taking from the mobile device is sent to a database. We went over a NoSQL approach. It's a big data database. In this specific case, we went with Firebase because I thought it would be better to go with a serverless application instead of also supporting a server side. After it's sent to the database, we can go to each computer in the company wherever we want and just go and see the graph that are generated from the database. This is exactly it. All the other computers in the company can reach it. This is give us a lot of power, since let's say that we are executing and maintaining this process in each build, in each pull request of a specific version of the application. So in each pull request, the potential is to recognize the specific problem when the developer actually adding the bug to the code. This is a great power for us. And since I love so much to develop automation tools, what I actually done is to develop a similar tool specifically for the conference. So in this way, instead of bringing a mobile device and obviously using another application, what I did, I adjusted the code in a way that it will support the web. It means that in this case, what I do, I'm actually testing my application that I'm testing is Google search. And what I do, instead of maintaining the CPU and the memory of the application of the mobile device, in this case, I'm maintaining the CPU and the memory of the Chrome browser using Selenium instead of Appium. So there are mild adjustments, and since it was created specifically for the conference, it wasn't with other teams or other team members. But this is generally what I'm going to show you in order not to show something directly from the company, but something which is very similar, which is, by the way, showing us that this is something that can be adjusted, not only to work on a mobile application, it can work on a web application, it can work with desktop application. It doesn't must work with Mac. We can adjust it to work with Windows operating system. And this way, it's something that actually supports us in a very general way. There are no limits to what we can do in the moment we decide to take it to our own hands and to create it by ourselves. I will go with you a little bit, I will do a short review about the code of the tool itself. You don't have to know any of the programming languages, I promise. It's just something that I will explain the idea behind it. So now I'm showing you a Java code, which is specifically the part of the test itself. And I promise that everything will be available, also the presentation, but other than that, the code itself. So now we can see that what we are doing, we're actually taking the test name, and no, it won't happen. We're taking the test name. You will see later what I'm using it for. I'm creating two threads, one that is executing the test, what I'm actually trying to test over time. In this case, we're just going to search over and over again in Google for different values. And the another thread is being used in order to send all the data from the computer to the database. And this is exactly what we are seeing here. Afterwards, this code actually is the test itself. It's very simple. For those of you that actually work with Selenium, you can see that it's basically just an infinite loop that navigates to Google all the time and just sending a text to the search field. It searches for this value over Google, and it happens again and again and again and again with minor slips over 5 seconds between each iteration. This code is actually the code that we are getting all the information from or the mobile device or the computer. We can see that we are doing it using the terminal. It can be different on Windows, different on Mac, and so on. We're getting a process which is searching for a certain value and parsing the values inside of it. And in this case, we get the CPU and the memory, easy as you can see. And afterwards, we are just taking this information and creating a format in which we will send it. After this, this is specifically the code of the web application, if you can call it. It's part of the HTML code. HTML code, I'm sure that most of you have seen it. It's a very simple code. Each site that we are going to is constructed from HTML elements, attributes, and so on. So I just wanted to focus in the button element. This element is actually using a function called createGraph. So when we will click on the button, this function will be called. We are passing on also the name of the test that I told you that we are taking from the test itself, the time, and the measurement. The measurement can be a CPU value or a memory value. And here is a little bit from what happens in the create graph. It takes all the information and passing it forward, passing the record of when this value was taken. Think that the graph is constructed from an x and y axis. So the x-axis will be the time, the specific timestamp when we took the CPU or the memory of the application. After that, we're just also passing it on. This is part of this is Angular code, by the way. Sorry for not mentioning it. This is AngularJS. It's really old. Nowadays, there is Angular 10, I believe, or even higher. And here we're also passing the information that we got. So we just went over the code. I want to show you the tool. What I've done, I hope that it will be possible to show. I actually started the execution of it before the talk was started. And here it is. We can see here that we actually have in the background some navigation, as I mentioned, over and over again in Google. In this way, we're actually testing also the Google app, even though I'm sure that it will be a really good performance data. But we're also testing different values. It's not like it's infinite, it's not randomized. There is a short list of values that I chose to search for. Take into consideration that at the same time, we're taking the information of the CPU and the memory of the browser and sending it to Firefox, just a database that contains it. And now we'll just pass on. I will stop it. And we'll look at, we'll just take a look how the tool itself presenting us the information. So the name of the test that I chose to pass is just test. It just showed that we can do different tests, different scenarios that we want to check. And beside of it, we also have here the different executions that were made. Some of them were before, some of them were afterwards. And we look at the last one, and we'll choose the CPU in this case. When we push the button, it will create the graph for us. So this is the CPU in my specific computer, just until I stopped it. We can see the different value. If there will be, we can see that in the CPU, we have like a value of 120, which is above 100%. So I will just tell you ahead that in Mac specifically, there are multiple cores. So it's just a value. It's not necessarily between 1 to 100. And we have the memory, which the memory is pretty much the same. There are more differences when we look at the CPU. But think to yourself that, let's say I worked at a company that there was a bug, and there were a lot of execution to database that were happening again and again because of a change that one developer put in. And it caused really for a restart of the computer of our clients. So we actually saw it already in the tool, and we know to raise our hand and say, hey, look, something is wrong. And it was very difficult without the tool even to notice that something is wrong. And I think that in a general idea, it's not like the graphs will be very different from time to time. They will remain pretty much the same. But in this one time, when you cause for this bug in your clients, it's worth to have it on the side. So this is pretty much what we see. What I want to mention, that I see programming and coding in a way like to giving birth to a baby, if you think about it, because of course there is the hard 9 months, but consider that afterwards it's actually getting harder. I mean, even to develop a tool or to develop something in your company, okay, it's not easy, but after you do it, there are a lot of processes that you need to keep in mind, a lot of maintenance, and just to develop it is the easy side. I think to go along with it and make it successful, it's more difficult. So this is about the code itself. Back to the presentation. Okay, so we just seen the demo. I wanted to share some quote from Albert Einstein. I think it's actually a very good opportunity to share it with you. And I want to think you to think not only about the code itself, about the tool itself, just think about how can you take a problem and make it a challenge, and maybe to try and support for self-development, something that can be used. And I think that if there is one slide that I would recommend to take a photo maybe, is this slide, since not only there is my personal email, of course, I'm available as much as I can, and you are more than welcome to join in LinkedIn. But I also shared here both of the projects. One is the test itself that is being executed, and the other is the web application itself. So you can just maybe go there and see the code and see, not necessarily taking it as is, because there are a lot of other factors that need to be taken in mind. But you can take it and maybe try to adjust it to your place. If you have a web application, you can use it very much like this. But if you have a mobile application that you need, it was done in our place, I will be happy to help. But it's not necessarily what we will see there. And I think since there is lunch soon, I don't want to keep you too much here. So, of course, if you have any questions, I will be happy to answer.
Hi. My question is related to the test method you showed on the slides. So I'm expecting to see the assertions in the test method, but you're just executing the thread executor. What is the purpose of using that? Or why can you just execute the separate process in parallel even to manipulate with the threads? Why do you need to test annotation?
Well, I'm specifically use JUnit, and I use it as part of an existing project. It's not exactly as you see here. It was very different in the workplace, since it was for a different application, and it was part of a greater project. Let's say I use it in one of the infrastructure that Yossi earlier mentioned. Mm-hmm. And since it was part of a larger project, I needed to adjust it to JUnit, for example, and JUnit works with test annotation, and I wanted to work exactly with the project, with the existing automation project, but on the other hand, not to make too much waves, let's say, or too much effect about the project itself. I wanted it to be very easy to use, but on the other hand, not to influence too much. So I just kind of led with the same idea, even though the annotation is pretty much the same. I use it here. It can be done without annotation, obviously, in this specific example. But if you use it in a bigger project that, let's say, do use test annotations, you do want to make the adjustment. So I didn't mention it here. It's used specifically with JUnit. So this is where the annotation comes from.
Okay. So you just wanted to adjust it to the JUnit execution?
Exactly,
okay.
Yes. I wanted to add it to an existing project and not to make like a different project completely, just in order to use this ability of doing tests that are specifically for...
Are you using Maven or Gradle?
Yeah, we're using Maven in the project.
You can use the assembly plugin, for example, to perform the separate phase.
Yeah, that's another thing. That's an option.
And the second question is, did you try to execute this infrastructure somewhere in the Docker containers, for example, or you are grabbing all these metrics only locally?
No, only local, since in our project, let's say, it was working with mobile devices, like real devices. So Dockers not necessarily will give us what we need, and I didn't focus specifically on the Docker side, even though I know it's amazing way to do automation testing, since we didn't have support for it in the existing project. But if you were asked before what can be done in addition, I think that something that can give a great value for this specific tool, like if I would need to think about the next step, is to add alerts, for example. If you have in production some errors, what they do, they just use the alert for specific values. So I think in this case, if we say that 200, value of 200 in the CPU is something that is critical, I would want to get an alert. So this is something that actually can be made as the next step. And I wish I had the time to do it, but yeah.
They have to take a look to the Prometheus and InfluxDB for that. It has the alertions infrastructure.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you for your presentation. I guess we